Hi everybody. In this video we're going to be looking at sleeping and dreaming. And one of the reasons it's so important for us to talk about sleep is just that it is so very critical for our general well-being. So you can see here, these are just a few of the effects that we see when people are consistently sleep deprived. And by sleep deprived, I don't mean that you get some magic number of hours of sleep at night, because there is individual variation in terms of how much sleep each person needs. The average adult needs 8 hours a night, but some people legitimately need more or less. Bigger thing to look for in deciding if you yourself are sleep deprived is how alert are you during the day? Do you need an alarm clock to wake you up? Do you need caffeine to keep you awake during the day? If you're bored in a class, do you find yourself going to sleep? If you can say yes to any of those things, you are probably sleep deprived. Daydreaming in class could just be because it's a boring teacher. Falling asleep means you're sleep deprived. If you need that alarm clock, if you need that caffeine, you've got a problem. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, you cannot erase sleep debt by just sleeping in periodically, like sleeping in on the weekends. That would be really cool, but it doesn't work that way. It's better than continuing to be sleep deprived, but it does not erase the effects that you see during the week. And so if you are consistently sleep deprived, we see a whole host of physical problems coming up, but also decreases in brain activity. It's harder to focus, your grades are going to suffer, you're going to study for more time, but wind up learning less because your brain is not able to make sense of what it is that you're learning. Also, we know from a lot of research that sleep is critical for consolidation of new long-term memories. So on a day that you do study, if you don't get a good night's sleep that night, you're going to lose a lot of the benefit of any studying that you did because you're not going to be sleeping enough to consolidate those new long-term memories. So sleep, absolutely critical. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start looking at what happens during a typical night's sleep. And this is for an adult. So this is a graphic that is straight out of your textbook. And it is showing what happens for a typical adult. Okay, and we're going to go through one at a time each of the stages and what happens there. But I want you to just see the pattern here, that this person starts at 11 o'clock at night, they're awake, they go to stage 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and you can't skip a stage along the way. You have to go through all of them. And they might go up and down a little bit, but ultimately, and here it's around 12:30 in the morning, we see that the person goes all the way back up through 2, and then for the duration of the night, instead of instead of stage 1 sleep, they start having REM sleep. So anywhere you see that light blue, that's this graphic's way of telling you that it is REM sleep instead of stage 1. So, and you can see here that by early morning, the person might naturally awaken, they might have to go to the bathroom, they go back to sleep. It's all totally normal. So it's not like people follow this perfect same pattern every night, but we do see a general pattern of going from light sleep down, so from stage 1 down to 4, back up to REM, back down to 4, and cycling through this throughout the night. So at the very beginning, when the person is awake, they're going to drift off initially into stage 1. And they are going to pass through an intermediate stage called the hypnagogic state. And that's that state where the person's not really asleep yet, but they're really not fully functional either. You know, this is that stage where you can ask someone, how was your day? And they're like, I like broccoli, right? So they're not really thinking completely normally. If you've ever had the experience where you're drifting off to sleep, and as you're falling asleep, all of a sudden you feel like you're falling and you feel like you hit the ground and you kind of jerk and then you feel like an idiot, that's also happening in that hypnagogic state. It happens to everybody, and it's weird and it's funny if you can see it happening to someone else, but it's not dangerous and it's totally normal. But anyway, once you start falling asleep, you pretty quickly get into stage 1 of sleep. And stages 1 and 2 are both a very light sleep. If you could wake someone up during stage 1 or 2, they might not be happy about it, but it'll be pretty easy to wake them up. Once you get down to stage 3 and then particular stage 4, this is now a much, much deeper sleep. It's very hard to wake someone up from stage 4, and if you do get woken up from stage 4, that's when you're like really groggy, and it might take you sometimes like a good hour before you really feel totally normal. And this is one of the problems actually with needing to rely on an alarm clock to wake you up, is that the alarm clock doesn't know what stage of sleep you're in. So if you wake up on your own, you'll naturally drift from a light sleep into a state of awakeness. If you use an alarm clock, you might be jolted out of that stage 4, and you're really not functioning very well, you're not concentrating very well. So not only does it not feel very good, but it can also be very dangerous if you now go and drive a car. So anyway, you go stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back up 3, 2, and then for the rest of the night, stage 1 gets replaced with REM sleep. And REM stands for rapid eye movement, because your eyes really are just going haywire when you're in REM sleep. And this is a really interesting sleep stage, and it's often called a paradoxical sleep because your brain is going nuts, electrically speaking, but your body is almost entirely paralyzed. All the other things you do during sleep, you kick, you roll over, whatever, they stop during REM sleep. You might kind of twitch a tiny bit and your eyes are moving, but that is basically it. And this is the stage where the vast majority of dreams occur. You know, if you wake someone from another stage, they might say, oh, I was happy. But that's kind of the extent of it. But your real vivid dreams that have plots, these are all occurring in REM sleep. So to go back to, and one of the other things to know about REM sleep is that it is suppressed by alcohol. And we've talked about this earlier in this semester, that alcohol, because it suppresses REM sleep, it impairs memory formation. So if you have two people who go to study tonight, you know, they're clones of each other, they study the same way, they learn the same amount, but then one gets a good night's sleep and the other doesn't, or the other has alcohol and suppresses REM, tomorrow, the one that got a good night's sleep is going to remember a whole lot more. So to go back to the graphic that I showed you before, a couple of things that I want you to note about this. You certainly don't need to go memorizing all of the times on here. But one is, I want you to note that at the beginning of the night, this person is spending proportionally a lot more time in that deep sleep. Whereas by like 4 or 5 a.m., they're not even hitting stage 4 at all. And then conversely, if you look at REM sleep, as the night goes on, they're spending more and more time in REM sleep. So at the beginning, you know, from like 12:30 there, that person's spending maybe like 10 minutes in REM. Whereas if you look from like 3 to 4 a.m., they're spending maybe a good 45 minutes at a time in REM sleep. One other interesting thing to note about REM sleep is that normally when you wake up, that paralysis goes away before you wake up. But there are some people, and a lot of people it happens once or twice, and then for a much smaller number of people it happens frequently, where they wake up and they are processing information normally, but that paralysis hasn't gone away yet. And usually, you know, this might last a minute or two, and that can be creepy enough if you're not expecting it. For some very unlucky people, this might last, you know, half hour, 45 minutes. And as you can imagine, it's a very, very scary feeling to wake up and have your body be paralyzed and not be able to do anything, even though you're processing information normally. And it's interesting, there's actually been some research showing that people who claim to have been abducted by aliens have a much higher than usual incidence of this waking paralysis. And so if you think about it, if someone wakes up and they're now processing information normally, but they're paralyzed, they're going to start wondering what the heck happened here. And if they were already prone to conspiracy theories, you might see how they would start thinking it could have been aliens. So anyway, the other thing that we're going to talk about here is dreaming, because of course that's what everyone always wants to know about. And there are a lot of theories that have been proposed over the years to explain why we dream. So the one that I always start with, just because it's usually the one people have heard with, is Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud basically said that dreams are your unconscious's way of acting out stuff that it shouldn't do in everyday life. So if you've got this repressed impulse to violently kill people, or to have sex with one of your parents. These are disturbing things. You shouldn't do them. And we are all happy if you don't do these things. So instead, you dream about them. But the thing is, these could be disturbing in dreams too. I mean, if you had a sex dream about one of your parents, I really hope that you would be disturbed by this. So what happens in dreams, according to Freud, is that you wind up having two levels of each dream. There is the manifest content, which is the actual plot of the dream, and then there's the latent content, which is what he felt was the underlying meaning. And he felt that we use a lot of symbols in our dreams. So for example, anything long and skinny is a penis, going on a journey signifies death, anything involving royalty or the president or something would be your parents. So he felt that there was a lot of symbolism. There could also be substitution. So if you had repressed impulses to have sex with one person, you might dream about having sex with another. So they're serving as a substitute in your dream. Now this is where we get that big giant red flag here when it comes to critical thinking, because how do we prove all this? Right? If you have a dream that you go to the store and you buy ice cream, maybe it's some kind of symbolism representing sex or death or something, and maybe it's just about ice cream, right? And how are we going to prove it either way? So Freud's theory leads to some very unfalsifiable hypotheses. If he says that your dream represents something else, we cannot prove that true or false. Okay, and it also leads to other hypotheses which have largely been falsified. So he felt, for example, that if a memory was emotionally disturbing, that people would repress it and would not dream about it directly. But we know from people who have post-traumatic stress disorder that people frequently do have vivid nightmares about traumatic events. They probably wish they weren't dreaming about it, and yet they are. So Freud's theory, it's been very influential historically, but you don't find a lot of people really being gung-ho Freudians today when it comes to dream interpretation. So instead, there's been a lot of emphasis on two other theories. One of them is what's called the activation synthesis theory. And this one basically says dreams are kind of random. That when you're sleeping, your brain is going nuts, but your body is paralyzed. And remember when we learned about the brain that, particularly in association cortex, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. So these folks might say, you know, let's say while you're dreaming, there's electrical activity in your motor cortex. Well, when you're awake, if there's electrical activity in your motor cortex, then your arms or your legs might move. But in your dream, you're paralyzed, but your brain has to come up with a reason to justify why those neurons were sending off action potentials. So maybe in your dream, you start running or punching or something like that. And then because there is so much other stuff going on in your brain, you've got random sights and sounds and smells, and these wind up just being incorporated into your dreams because your brain has to justify why those action potentials were fired. So these, the activation synthesis proponents would basically say, dreams don't have a hidden meaning, accept it, be amused by them, but don't read too much into it. And then the other theory we want to look at is what's called the neurocognitive theory, which basically says dreams mirror your cognitive content. If you're stressed about work, you might dream about work, that there's not necessarily a hidden meaning. And they also mirror cognitive abilities. So we know, for example, that children's dreams have plots that are a lot simpler than those of adults. And that makes sense because young kids can't handle complex plots. They don't have that cognitive ability. So these are three theories of dreams. There are others that have been proposed over the years, but those are the main ones you tend to hear about. If you have any questions, please either call me or email me. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great day.